Okay, so what I sort of talked about on Sunday with the students is Indigenous studies, Māori studies are quite relatively new fields, in the academy. And so I think the good thing about that is that they're still evolving and defining that space. I think the first activity we did on Sunday was I asked them to go away in groups and sort of brainstorm what they think being Indigenous means. So what does it mean to be Indigenous in today's world? And then just to get a picture of what people understood in terms of that term. But on the other side of it too was that in this paper in particular, students get introduced to philosophies and theories that have been used by Indigenous academics, used by Indigenous philosophers within the Western tradition, to speak back to that tradition. So to challenge Western thinking, challenge Western ideologies, challenge Western beliefs and worldviews. So they tapped into these theories or traditions within their own culture, so within Western philosophy and Western academia, that were actually critical of themselves. And so you can see why Indigenous people sort of bought into these ideas, because it gave them the tools to speak back to the system and gave justification for Indigenous worldviews or Indigenous ways of being and knowing, and not just some monocultural understanding of the world. And so that some of the terms that we get introduced to right from the very outset are Western kupu, so Western concepts, but they're concepts that I think are used to justify and rationalise Indigenous ways of knowing, or different ways of knowing, to the dominant culture that exists within Western society. And so social construction is one of the key concepts. And that's really sort of asked questions around how our ideas are shaped in terms of how we understand ourselves and others in the world. And so a key part of social construction is language. And so we'll look at that shortly. But really this is all around meaning. And so, but what basically social construction says is that meaning is not sort of out there for us to grab a hold of. It's actually something we've constructed socially. So it makes us ask questions about truth, reality, meaning, and all that sort of thing. And so if that is a compelling question, then it challenges those dominant worldviews that sort of exist at the moment about whose truth. So, whose knowledge is the right knowledge, and who says that this is the right way to do things, or this is the right way to think. So you can see how some of these ideas become quite relevant for Indigenous studies anyway, the field of Indigenous studies. So that was sort of the preemptor to this paper on the weekends. And so we went through just the normal stuff, which is the descriptor of the course. So I'm sure you guys have had a read through the course outline and all that sort of stuff. So I'm not going to, sort of spend too much time on the learning outcomes and stuff. I'm sure you guys are able to make sense of those. The assessments. So the forums that you guys started this week, they're worth 40% of the final mark. So there's 10 forums and they're worth 4% each. And they're due at the end of the weeks in between the Noho. So Noho 1, and then we've got a 2-week window, and then we have our next Noho. So the forums are due at the end of each week. So you guys have already done your first forum, and that's due on the 28th of Feb. So well done. And the next one will be, this shouldn't say May, it should say March. So that's a typo. Sorry there. I'll get back there. And then, so that's ongoing throughout the year, throughout the semester. And then Aramatua 2 is the presentation. and that can be done in pairs or in threes. So it sort of makes sense, if you guys can do that together. I mean, that's no worries. If you wanted to include somebody else, we've got Zoom technology if you wanted to do that, but that's up to you. I've left the students to make their minds up around that, and that'll include a presentation plus a 1,000-word report that you all work on.
Yeah.
Okay, and then the last bit is a literature review. So it's just a review of the different literature that talks about some of these theories and concepts that we've been introduced to in this paper, but we'll get introduced to those a bit more later on in the course. So just making sure you're clear about what's expected in the assessments and when the due dates are, and just locking those into your guys' busy calendars, because I know you will be busy with your mahi and that sort of, and whānau and all that sort of stuff. So just, and if there's any issues or anything that's, might sort of prevent you from getting things in, as long as you just communicate with us and let your kaiako know, everything will be sweet. We'll find a way through it. So today in the session we were looking at 4 questions, I guess. Sorry, Cuz, is this right? Sorry, I've just had my flatmate come in. All right. He's having a vodka, the lucky bugger. So the first question was, how do we know what is common sense or the truth in our world? How do we come to know about ourselves and others? So how does identity get constructed? Is it something natural that we're just inherently born with, or is it something else? So in that sort of sense, what is social construction? So when you get introduced to this idea, understanding what it is and what it's saying, and then so what does that mean, for us in terms of things like identity or knowing or whatever it is. And then you're going to, another term that you're going to get introduced to is cultural discourse. So what is cultural discourse and why is it, or is it not an important concept for us? So these are all in the context of Indigenous studies, really, these questions, but probably more specifically for us as Indigenous peoples or tangata whenua of Aotearoa, New Zealand. So that's what we were sort of looking at. So the key concepts and ideas are social construction, this thing called discourse, which we'll talk about a bit later, structuralism and binary oppositions, which I'll talk a little bit to later. We got into that stuff, I think, after lunch on the Sunday, so everyone was pretty tired, and it was probably pretty heavy stuff for them to sort of pick up on a Sunday afternoon. So we probably didn't get through as much of that as we wanted to. But again, there's some resources on the Iwananga page that'll help us with that. And then we're going to move on from structuralism into what they call post-structuralism, which is sort of the sort of advancement or movement from this tradition of structuralism to something new. And then deconstruction. And the easiest way to look at deconstruction is if we believe in the idea that our world is socially constructed, then deconstruction really is about pulling that apart, unpacking how meaning becomes the truth or how meaning becomes constructed. So deconstruction is like a critical process that we do to sort of, and there's an example in this session that I can get you guys to have a go at, actually, that'll sort of introduce you to this idea of deconstructing texts. So the first thing for us in this course, though, is so what I'm introducing students to is that there's this dominant discourse, so dominant cultural sort of worldview that exists in mainstream societies, and they're all about the prevailing values, prevailing knowledge. You guys still there?
Yeah,
Yep.
they cut out a little bit, but we're back.
Cool, cool. You know, so prevailing knowledge, what knowledge is important, that's all sort of um, decided upon by the dominant group in any society. The hierarchies that exist in a society determined by the dominant culture and the practices and so on. So a dominant discourse is all about the status quo. It's about keeping things as they are, and that's the way it should be. But in this course, what we're trying to do is develop in students a more critical lens. And so how we develop that critical lens is introducing ourselves to these different concepts and these different terms that enable us to look at phenomena or events or things that happen in society in a slightly different way. So social construction, these things called binary oppositions, deconstruction and dominant discourse as examples, give us the tools for this, to develop this critical lens. But the intent is about transforming the status quo. So it's always about transforming or even looking at what we do today and asking ourselves, is that the right way that, is it right what we are doing today? Should we be doing something differently or challenging what we're doing now? So a critical lens is always about transforming the status quo, not maintaining it generally. So as students of the humanities and as students of Indigenous studies, we should all be developing this critical lens and understanding the world through this sort of critical discourse. And so I'm going to get you guys to do this. I'll give you 5 minutes, and I want you to just have a bit of a chat about how a newborn baby comes to make sense of itself and the world around it. So you guys might have some current experience in that area. But consider the following. So what does the world consist of for a newborn baby? How does it interact with the world? How does it make sense of those interactions? And when does an infant become aware of itself? When does a baby, an infant baby actually become aware of itself? So I'll give you 5-10 minutes, and then we'll come back.
Okay.
That long enough? All good?
Yeah, no, it's long enough.
Cool. Can't wait.
Stay there.
Yeah.
All right.
I do it better. Teaching.
yeah. It's Nigerian too. We've got PhDs, but it's well, they don't get these, they don't get funded, eh? They have to pay for themselves. Yeah, it's full fees, eh? So they pay 10 grand a year. Yeah. So, since they to find out she has to pay for the whole thing, eh? And visa expires in July. So she has to get a new visa and has to get the right visa. Yeah. I said, oh, look, I can support you by just saying that you're interested in enrolling in every enrollment. Noticed your visa is out of date and is about to expire and is the wrong visa. So she's a lovely girl. And she asked her what papers. She said, oh, English, maths, humanities. So she did humanities papers at Hamilton Girls. So we got like 4. She would have been the 4th school leaver that we would have got. We don't get school leavers, bro. Yeah. Wow, that's what I'm thinking. Imagine the stories that she would have in an Indigenous context, eh? Yes. I didn't think her English was very good, but man, I spoke to her today on Zoom. She's like, oh man, she gave a real perspective in class. And we got that 16-year-old. That's another thing. You've got to wrap around 16-year-olds. Well, see, because we're going to lose Barrage. She's the Nigerian girl. We lost another one last week. I thought it was because that brought us back down to 19, but I think Berlina, one from Yorkshire Bay, and Kipper bring us back up to 21. So it's a shame you could have hit 23. All right, how'd you guys get on?
Good.
All right. I
What
feel
did
like a terrible parent.
So, what did you come up with? What?
Yeah, you go then.
So, what does the world consist of for a newborn baby?
Yep.
We're talking about the sense of smell, the touch of like mum and whānau, what it hears, and also like inside the mother's womb. And baby's already connecting with the surrounding and its environment.
Yep.
Mother and the world, outside world.
Can't wait. Yeah, that's awesome stuff. One of the things that didn't come up I don't think it came up on Sunday was smell, and that's probably one of the first senses, early senses that
Yeah.
uses or starts to make sense of. Like, it knows when it can smell mum.
Yeah. That breast milk, and
Yeah.
it's that whole bonding between the mother and the child.
Can't
and
wait.
the baby recognises that sense of smell for each parent and whānau member or whomever that's involved in that upbringing.
Yep. So in terms of how it interacts with that world, so
it'll be based on those same sort of senses again, eh?
Yeah.
Yep.
Although they might not be aware of it,
they're interacting.
yeah, they're interacting.
They're just not quite making sense of that interaction.
No.
That's what that next question was. So how do they begin to make sense of their
Well,
interaction?
sometimes that sense of security in the home too, in the environment. They tend to make sense of routines.
Yeah. We got we put down like routines and sound and touch and sensors and all that sort of stuff.
Oh boy.
The exposure they have, eh?
Yep.
Yeah.
So as a baby starts to make sense of its world, is it starting to develop a form of communication?
Yeah. Consciousness or whatever.
Consciously.
Oh,
Is it?
subconscious. Oh no.
Oh yeah, it will be. Subconsciously. Because if it's hungry, it cries.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. And it knows if I cry, something happens.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can't wait.
Manipulation and that when they get much older too.
Yeah. The next one should be, how do teenagers make sense of their world? Yeah.
Well, they're still developing that frontal, to say.
Can't wait.
It's still developing, so they can't make sense really of what's going on around them because so much is happening to them. In terms of puberty, mentality, the spiritual elements, all that. It's kind of like they're becoming adults, but they're still stuck in a realm where that development hasn't come through yet.
Yep. So in terms of newborn babies, as they sort of start to communicate with the world or those around them, so are they sort of developing some sort of language in that sense?
I think they are in their terms. They would be.
So to communicate, we sort of link communication to language, and it doesn't necessarily need to be a spoken.
No.
It's other different ways that we can.
Different ways of languages, eh?
And then that last one is, when does an infant become aware of itself? So
Well, they don't really have an awareness of their own, do they? No, in a sense.
So, I guess when a baby sort of starts to see the world,
with their emotions and motivations, I don't know, but they are aware.
Yeah.
I don't know how to describe it.
We broke down a couple of things, and that was the first bit. The next bit was like they become aware of themselves when they're walking and when they're touching and googling to their parents, or they're playing, or they're moving their arm in front of, or when they see their hand for the first time, or something like that. So I think they start to become aware when they.
Well, they try and make sense of it.
Yeah, it makes sense. Yeah.
So what happens when they see themselves in the mirror for the first time?
It's like any normal surprise.
Yeah.
But the more often you do that in terms of a routine every morning or every night with them, I think they start grasping the fact that that's them in the mirror.
Yeah.
As well, we do that with our moko, and she recognises the routine, but I'm still not sure if she is aware that that's who she is.
And then that whole idea of that who she is, because when we're adults, we can ask ourselves that question, and we'll say whatever. I am such and such. I am Māori, or I am whatever it is.
Yeah.
But as a child,
they don't identify themselves to one culture, do they?
No, it's so
they're very innocent and quite open.
So what social construction will sort of suggest is this is when the world starts becoming constructed for us as individuals. And so identity, for example, isn't something that's out there just waiting for us to grab a hold of. We actually construct that identity.
Mm.
You know, so that's just, it just poses that sort of question. So kapoi is
Makes sense, yeah.
some good kōrero there. What this slide, what I try to do is talk about, if we're looking at social construction and identity or whatever, it's not just something that's, we've got to understand that historically how these ideas might be quite interesting for us to understand the sort of development of, say, Western society. And so this slide talks about in Western history. So this is an interpretation of Western tradition. So I'm not saying it's the interpretation, but this is an interpretation of Western history and tradition that sort of suggests that Western history is made up of cultural traditions of not only knowledge but of power and domination. And so for this example, I've sort of decided to go right back to the sort of age of antiquity. So this is Western, this is a Western narrative, obviously. So going back to the age of antiquity when the Greek and Roman periods ruled.
BC,
Yeah, and you know, in that time it was polytheistic, so there was about multiple gods.
Gods, yeah.
Yeah, multiple gods. You had the philosophers and the scientists and mathematicians of that time that we all know of, that were, you know, trying to make sense of the world through the philosophies and understandings that they had at that time. But obviously the polytheistic sort of beliefs, the beliefs in multiple gods and different gods was quite a powerful factor in terms of how they understood the world. And that was called they call that the sort of dawn of Western civilization. So it was when Western civilization first became apparently sort of this great thing that occurred in Western history. But what happened is obviously those empires fell, and we went into what historians would call the Dark Ages. And what was happening at the end of the sort of fall of the Roman Empire, and as they came into what they defined or classified as the Dark Ages, you know, there was a significant person that had a massive impact on Western culture, and that of course was, you know, brought about the rise of Christianity. And so during that period, the truth about the world and how we understood the world was really determined by the Word of God. You know, that was the sort of dominating knowledge system of that time. And we'd shifted from these sort of empires and civilizations and societies that the Greeks and the Romans had introduced. You fell back into what they call feudal societies, which were sort of, I guess, sort of more akin to tribal type things, but you had the monarchies and the landowners, the barons, became sort of the wielders of control and power, basically because they had land. And the one thing that they did was they connected themselves to the power of God or religion by saying that they were extensions of God. And so that gave them the sort of power over people, you know, to sort of whatever, to justify, you know, their own practices and their own positions and all that sort of stuff. And so you hear about in those times, you know, that people were exploited. They were called serfs in those days. So you didn't have any land, but you worked for a baron. You became a part of his army or whatever it was, and in return he would give you land. That's how those societies sort of operated in that time, what they called the Dark Ages. And so Christianity and religion in particular was the sort of the stronghold of how we came to understand the world back in those times. But what happened is there was another cultural shift, and we shift into what they refer to as the Enlightenment period. And so that's the discovery of philosophy and sciences that were introduced in the Greek sort of Roman period. And the sort of renaissance that occurred because of it sort of spurred this revolution, the scientific and industrial revolution. And so what science did then was eventually undermine religion and the sort of knowledge and truths of religion in terms of how we understood the world were challenged heavily by science and this new body of knowledge that, you know, we a lot of the people at that time were saying would help us unlock the secrets of nature. You know, through empirical means, you know, we could you know, find out everything about what is true in the world through these new systems of knowledge, through these new processes of investigation, of experimentation. We can unlock the secrets of nature. There was this assumption that you know, science was going to just change the whole of humanity for the better. And so that's the next tradition. So this new tradition of domination came about through this scientific and industrial sort of revolution. And while what was happening at the same time, though, was you had all these scientists and great thinkers, but they were also very religious. You know, they were also part of that tradition that believed in Christianity and the Word of God and everything like that. So there were tensions between a lot of them in terms of what they were learning through this new body of knowledge, science, and what they sort of grown up believing about Christianity and religion. So those tensions were all going on, but what was happening is this industrial revolution opened up the world. So in that Greek-Roman period, there were trade routes, there were, you know, economies that existed at that time, but the world was quite small because it took so long to travel from place to place. With the scientific and industrial revolution, you know, machinery, steam engines, you know, there was just this boom in factories. You know, we could extend markets out to different places, you know, that which meant that for a country, if they wanted to grow their economy, you know, they could sell anything that they made in their own society to other countries or different parts of the world that they could access a lot easier through this new technology that was coming about. And so what that then started to develop into was what we sort of know as capitalism today. You know, so these market economies, and what was driving and what they tended to do was drive, you know, the idea for countries, if they want to grow and be stronger and be rich, that you know, they grow their markets. They need to tap into resources to grow a stronger economy, to make more money, to have bigger armies, bigger, you know, and all these sorts of things. So this whole idea of economies and capitalism started coming into being around that sort of 1700, 1800s. And so how did countries in those days extend or grow their ability to make money?
Trade.
Yeah.
Sorry. Trading.
Trading, yeah. And so, you know, in order to trade, if they didn't have resources, you know, how would they grow their empire? If they're looking to grow an empire, you would be looking for countries that would have resources. You know, so you could grow your empire, and so that's where colonization come into it.
Yeah.
Let's grow our empire, so let's colonize these countries, bring them into a part of our empire, exploit the resources that they have, and grow our empire that way. So that sort of led into what we sort of come to know as the modern age.
Mm.
Okay, so you have these cultural traditions of history over time. So that Greek-Roman period, then you came into where Christianity dominated, then you came into where science dominated, and probably, you know, in all reality, still probably dominates today, science. But now there's these bigger forces, globalization, capitalism still exists. And so we live in this modern era. So for us as students of Indigenous studies and the humanities, that's the context in which we make sense of, you know, Indigenous issues, the impact of colonization on Indigenous peoples. So this is just to give an overview of the context that we, I think, work in as students of Indigenous studies and the humanities.
Mm. Cool.
Does it make sense?
Yeah.
Lovely. So social construction. So these next few slides are really looking at sort of what this thing social construction is. So I've just given a bit of an explanation, but social construction for me refers to the idea that meaning is created. So it's produced and reproduced socially. So through social interactions with others. Knowledge, truth, and reality, therefore, is merely that which is agreed upon by the majority. And a key part of social construction, again, is language. And that's probably one of the key points that I want to emphasize in terms of this presentation anyway, in terms of social construction, is that language is the fundamental key element of social construction and how it works. And so what that basically means is those thinkers that sort of came into this sort of idea was our central point of meaning about the world has changed over time, right? So we came from the Dark Ages where the central meaning of the world was the Word of God. That was the center of all our meaning.
Mm.
Then we had the Enlightenment period. So the center of all our meaning was science. We can, crack open the secrets of the world through scientific endeavor. When you come into structuralism and post-structuralist theory, what they've come to the point now is that the center of meaning in our world is not any of these things. It's not a divine being. It's not a knowledge system like science, but it's actually language.
Mm.
Language is at the center of all meaning. And that's one of the key premises, I think, about social construction. So one of the questions I asked the students, I said, can you think of anything, right? Think of anything without using language. Try and have a thought without using language to structure that thought. Can, is that possible? I don't know. I don't know the answer, but if you try and do it, it's pretty hard.
That is hard because I'm thinking language.
Yeah, that's right. So, I mean, I think it's quite a compelling argument
Mm.
when we start talking about social construction. And so this other part of social construction that we want to introduce ourselves to is, or another concept is cultural discourse. So discourses, for me, can be understood as sort of cultural systems of meaning. They establish certain rules, conventions, habits, behaviors, roles, and blah, 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 blah. And that constitutes a discourse, For that discourse to have meaning, collectively, we all have to agree on what that meaning is and what those practices are, that sort of thing. And so social construction, therefore, as a lens for critical analysis, assumes that all meaning is socially, culturally, and historically located. And I think I've got a little clip here. Now, you have to tell me whether you can hear this.
Oh, it's easier to have
I'll give it a go and see.
Trumpet, simplifying summer. How far are we from the
You
beach?
can just hear it.
Can you hear it?
Yeah, a little bit.
Togs become undies. Skin-tight swimming togs, an item of clothing you'd happily wear in public, but not in public. So how far is too far?
the undies,
Togs,
togs.
togs, 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 undies, 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 undies.
Cool beard.
If you can't see the water, you're in underpants. Local supermarkets, pedestrian crossings, office buildings, public transport. Anywhere more than 300 metres from the water's edge, all underpants transformation areas. If we treat the budgie smuggler with respect, undies, 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 togs, everyone wins. Trumpet, simplifying summer.
Oh, even the videos didn't go that well. But have you guys seen that ad?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember
So,
that ad big time.
yeah. So undies. Is he wearing undies or togs?
Yeah.
I use that as a sort of an introduction into a simplified sort of understanding of how discourse operates. So how can he be wearing the same thing, but it can be one thing or another?
Yeah, I think he's always wearing togs anyway. It's just the way people view it.
Yep.
Because it doesn't matter
That's-
where he wears them, it's still togs. I see them still as togs.
Yep.
So,
But you see how the impact it had on people,
Yeah.
how they behaved when they sort of were in this space where, oh, hell, should I be offended by this or not?
Yeah.
So what I sort of say is that he's shifting from one discourse to another.
Yeah.
All right. So we're socially constructed that in this environment on the beach, what he's wearing are togs and is appropriate. It's okay. When he moves 30 meters away into the city or the town, suddenly it's not okay.
Yeah.
Nothing's changed from what he's wearing, but the discourse has changed.
Mm.
And we collectively agree that in this environment, that technically isn't. Those aren't togs. Those are undies. I mean, we do that subconsciously.
Yeah, we do.
And so that's an example of sort of how discourse gives us a lens to be able to understand these types of things that happen, and they happen every day.
Every day, everywhere.
Yeah, and everywhere. And so in terms of identity, in terms of understanding the Indigenous context for Indigenous peoples and societies around the world, you can see how discourse can become a powerful tool to understand that context and to critique the dominant discourse that exists at the time. There's another interesting, I don't know if you guys had a chance to look at it, but there's a link in the Iwananga page called What is Discourse? And it's a really, really good explanation, because they use a baseball game as an example. So the way you dress, the way you talk at a baseball game, the food you eat, how you behave is part of a discourse. If you went and behaved and dressed like that in a flash restaurant, it would be, you'd be looked at strangely, it wouldn't be appropriate. But they give this really good explanation of primary discourse and secondary discourse. So our primary discourse is what we're introduced to at home in our life, our values, and secondary discourses are the things that we go outside in the world, whether that's school or work or other different, and we can shift. A lot of us can shift between one discourse and another. I posted on our Be Hum page an example from Facebook. Have you seen the Shortland Street Stars doing the Kiwi hello?
Yeah.
Yeah, like this. And I said, well, that's an example of discourse at play.
Yeah.
So that whole practice, this Kiwi sort of thing, is only meaningful to those that are a part of that discourse. If you did that in another
culture, another society, it could be meaningless or could mean something else.
Yeah.
Okay, and then what I also talked about is you can be a part of a discourse but not very literate at that discourse, because if you watch some of those actors, they couldn't really do it very well anyway.
No.
You know,
Horrible.
so they weren't literate in that discourse. So it was, you know, there's examples of it all the time, and I sort of try and prompt the students that if you see something on Facebook or you've got something that is a good example, then we'll upload it onto our Facebook page, to our group page, so that we can keep, you know, learning about this stuff in our everyday lives that come up. This is it, primary and secondary discourses, but I don't think you guys can hear it, so I'll let you guys to go and watch that. It's just the link says what is discourse, I think, in our IND 101 page. And so this is another thing about language. So what social construction says is that language and how we attach language to concepts in the world, objects in the world, is arbitrary. So what that basically means is the symbols that we write for cat and how we say the word cat, and then the object, the cat in the real world, there's no natural connection between them. We've just constructed that connection, because you can go to any other language and they've constructed it something else. It's got a different language, you know, gato or ngeru, all mean the same thing, but the language is different because it's come from a different discourse, obviously. But the key thing is that there's no natural connection between the words we give to the world and the objects in the world. You know, there's nothing inherently that says the cat is a cat. We've actually given it that name. So that's an important part of how language works in social construction. So what does that mean? So why might it be important for us to understand? So we would argue that social construction is important in relation to identity. What does that mean for us then in terms of Indigenous identity, for Māori identity? What does it mean for food? You know, the types of foods that we eat. You know, for breakfast, for example. You know, what we have for breakfast here is normal for here, but it might not be normal for somewhere else. I was in France last year, and trying to find bacon and eggs in France for breakfast was like, all you could eat was baguettes and cheese and prosciutto. So, you know, what we eat for breakfast is a constructed you know, concept as well. Colour, you know, so what colour do we associate for girls and boys? You know, so what colour do we associate for girls? Pink. Is that right? And boys is
Blue.
blue. Now, apparently, there's an article in one of the videos that I've attached that shows that it was the opposite. 50, 60 years ago, apparently. Blue was for the girls and pink was for the boys.
Wow.
So
That's kind of similar to the tangi. For Māori wearing black tangi is correct in terms of Queen Elizabeth brought that in.
Yeah. So we think it's a Māori thing.
Yeah, we think it's a Māori thing, but it, you know, it's not, is it?
Yeah, that's right. So,
colonisation.
That's right. So, you know, those are the other sorts of things we've got to consider being Indigenous. When we say Māori, what is it that we accept as being Māori today that's actually part of colonisation that we just accept as being the norm? Gender, you know, so the gender roles.
that are assigned in society. They're constructions. That's what social constructionists would argue. And the meaning we give to symbols as well are socially constructed. So these are some examples here. So this here, an example of that is in Iraq, thumbs up means this. So the soldiers that were there during the Iraq War had to learn that pretty quickly. That doing this symbol, the thumbs up symbol, was quite an offensive practice. That sort of shows that the construction of these symbols to mean and what they mean are basically dependent upon the society that decides what they mean. So what's this?
It's defined as Satan's fork, isn't it?
Yep. So that was taken from a picture from the internet, and it's Poseidon's staff or whatever he uses. So it's not meant to reflect the devil at all. And this, and we know what this is, but that was taken from a Japanese map. It was a symbol for I can't remember what it was, but it was a symbol that they used on their maps. So again, social construction sort of suggests, meaning is not sort of natural or inherent or stable or out there forever. It's actually constructed by societies over time, socially, culturally, and historically located. So how do socially constructed ideas about people come about? And in particular, looking at cultural stereotyping and cultural hegemony. So I think I've given a definition of hegemony in the glossary, but basically hegemony, hegemon or hegemony is a Latin word, I think, which means leader or dominance. And so cultural hegemony is about cultural dominance. So how does one culture make certain truths about a particular group or certain practices normal, common sense? So cultural hegemony and cultural stereotyping sort of sit side by side. And so how a culture dominated another culture back in the old days was either through violence, and then you were forced to adopt our cultural ways of knowing and doing things. We can just look back at our parents who were caned for speaking te reo. That was a form of hegemony. And the other is sort of coercive. They sort of coerce you into sort of accepting certain cultural values or views. But the most powerful form of hegemony for me is the subtle thing.
The worst one.
Yeah, the worst one. Through the media, through ourselves, we adopt these sort of stereotypes of particular groups and of ourselves. I love that saying. It says we all use stereotypes all the time without knowing it. We have met the enemy of equality, and the enemy is us. And we've all sort of done it. We've all sort of jokingly said something about women drivers or Asian people or Maori or whatever.
Binaries.
So just as humanities students, as Indigenous studies students, those sorts of things are at the forefront of our minds. So these are the subtle ways that it become indoctrinated in us. The magazines, the stories. Why, what do we associate with the color black? Evil or bad. The baddies always dressed in black, or they always rode the black horse. Those are constructions, not realities. And what are the impact of those subtle messages that are being, given to us day in and day out? The White House. There was no coincidence they called it the White House. They knew exactly what they were doing by naming it the White House. But what does it say? It reflects white is pure and righteous. Black is the opposite to that. This one here is a cracker. twist. You mean a woman can open it? And in our movies, you can see how certain groups are represented in certain ways because of their ethnic background or whatever it is. So again, this is where social construction becomes quite an interesting topic. And then the socially constructed ideas and representations of being Māori over the years. All those sorts of examples. So, Indigenous studies students would be sort of quite critical of these sorts of things, or aware of them anyway, of the power of the media to misrepresent certain cultures. And we talked about the example of Police 10-7. And this is how language again becomes quite an interesting point. Yeah. So if you're Māori Pacific, you're out front and centre on there.
Yeah.
But they don't refer to you as Pākehā; they refer to you as Caucasian. Who defines themselves as Caucasian? And what does it mean in terms of the Māori Pākehā sort of identity that sits there? It just perpetuates these sort of stereotypes of the, Māori being this and that, and the pure righteous Pākehā title not being tainted by those types of things. So it's just interesting, it just makes us look at things in a slightly different way. And this is where we come into those binaries. So we've just identified the sort of Māori Pākehā binary. And so binaries are where conceptual pairs sit together, and they require each other to exist or bring meaning to each other. So we can't understand the notion of good without the notion of bad. Right and wrong, hot and cold, man, woman, language. As a part of language, these binaries are really important. They assert stable meaning. That's what a structuralist would say. Structuralism says that language has to have these binaries for that meaning to be stable. The problem with these binaries is they establish these hierarchies. So one sort of dominates the other. So in the man-woman binary, in a Western sense, which one would be the dominant out of those two?
The white.
Yeah, so white and black. Yep, man and woman. You would say man would be at the center, woman on the edge.
Yeah.
Māori Pākehā, same sort of thing. So these binaries sort of establish these hierarchies of power, domination, and exclusion. And a lot of it's around either being the same and different. So there's a binary between sameness. So being same, as long as we're all the same, you can be a part of the center. But if you're different, you're the other. You're out there. And so that's how these binaries sort of work. So binaries were part of this structuralist understanding of language. They said language has to have these binaries. That's how it's part of the structure of language that brings it meaning. So if that's true then, and our reality is based through language, through socially constructed means, then aren't we doomed if we live by those binaries? Because we're always going to have those hierarchies. We're always going to have this them and us sort of position between whatever it is out of those two concepts. And that's what I think we should be challenging as students of the humanities and Indigenous studies, particularly in this paper anyway. So you're okay with this sort of idea of binaries in language and culturally? So if they exist within language, then culturally they exist because it's through language that we actually make sense of our world. And so
I didn't know what binary was until the first the first one before.
I think we already knew the concept, but we never knew the word actually was called binary.
Yeah. So in computer world, the binary is 1 and 0. But in language, so in structuralism, for example, it says that there's these sort of inherent structures of language, of all language, these rules that govern meaning. and one of them is binaries. And so if they're right, if they're saying these binaries assert stable meaning, then I think we've got a problem, because then we've got hierarchies that exist forever that we can never go past. But so my PhD was looking at trying to stabilize the binary, because they talk about the self and the other. So the dominant self would be at the center, and everything else would be the other. So whenever they talked about Māori Pākehā relations, Māori were always the other.
Yeah.
And I just felt, I never grew up feeling like that. And it wasn't until, every time I went to conferences and they referred to me as the other, I always felt like you were othering me. I never believed that, I never saw myself as that. But when you look at society, you can see how that happens in reality. It's happening all the time. And it could be, oppression of women. Could be oppression of young people in society. Could be oppression of old people in society. Could be, so it is a reality. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
So this is where deconstruction comes in. Now, Jacques Derrida is the French philosopher that's been sort of renowned for deconstruction. It was his concept process that he put out there, and he was attacking structuralism's assertion that these binaries in language are stable. And so for him, it was always about undermining those binaries, and then saying that stability in those binaries in terms of their meaning is not as clear cut as structuralists might think. They're not actually stable. Meaning actually slips, and I think a really cool example of that is in class when I asked students about in a Māori Pākehā binary who would be at the centre, and in a Western sort of context you would go, Pākehā at the centre, but had a wonderful student and she said Māori straight away. She hadn't bought into that whole concept of Pākehā being at the centre. For her, Māori was at the centre. So that sort of challenges this sort of fixed idea that structuralism says that all meaning is stable within language because of these binaries. See, because even one person's perspective that's different to everybody else suggests that stability can be destabilized. So deconstruction is about a process that identifies the various ways in which a term that is privileged over another in binary oppositions, or in a whatever context. So it identifies the binary. So that's part of the deconstructive process, but it also tries to undermine it. Okay, so it says, no, that binary is actually not a reality if you look at it in this way. Māori have used that at times to deconstruct Pākehā or dominant sort of societal views about topics. And deconstruction will expose assumptions and contradictions in a particular context. And I think I've got an example here. And it'll also reveal that meaning is not singular. There isn't just a single truth. There's multiple truths and often conflicting meanings. So deconstruction is all about that. And so it's not about a single truth. So the single truth sort of approach really is part of that whole scientific enlightenment sort of period ideology. Science, we can find the absolute truth about the nature of the world. Yes, you can, about nature and about certain things. But when it comes to human beings, society, and social phenomena, it's not as clear cut. It's not the same as the natural world. We know if we hold a pen and just let it go, it'll fall to the ground. We know that'll happen 100 times. In a social context, we might say we do this and people will respond to this 98% of the time. The 2% actually says, well, that means that there is no sort of absolute certainty within a social context. But in the scientific context about nature, they would argue that there is. So in terms of Indigenous studies and humanities, deconstruction is an important concept. We won't do this, but we just did a little activity, looked at these symbols and saw what the students came up with in terms of what they represent. So you can sort of see what in a typical American, what the flag might represent to them. But if you were in Afghanistan or Iraq, they would have different meanings of what that symbolizes. So this little activity was a little bit about that. But this is the one I'd probably like to just go through with you guys before we finish off. And what this is based on a debate that was had in 1998 with Tau Hinare and a legal academic. So I think it was a lawyer who was an academic over naming of the North and South Island. And Tau Hinare was wanting to push for them being given their Māori names officially. And this caused an uproar. And so David Round really challenged Tau Hinare's position. He challenged the whole idea of biculturalism. And this guy Dufresne wrote this article about that. So I've just pulled a little bit out, and so I'll just read it quickly. And I want you to think about what perspective Dufresne is coming from, and who is he speaking on behalf of. So the biculturalism, the naming of the North and South Island debate would have been between who? Predominantly Māori and mainstream New Zealanders.
Yeah.
So Dufresne writes, it was one of those rare moments when someone had the courage to articulate what a lot of New Zealanders privately think, but are either too polite or timid to say. Like David Round, they resent the feeling that this thing called biculturalism is increasingly being imposed upon them, and their own cultural heritage devalued and pushed aside in the process, with very little regard for the will of the majority. So who was Dufresne speaking on behalf of when he says, when someone had the courage to articulate what a lot of New Zealanders privately think? Who was he speaking on behalf of? Is he speaking on behalf of Māori or mainstream New Zealander?
No, it must be.
Because he's supporting David Round's challenge against Tau Hinare.
Well, of course.
Yeah,
Yeah,
New
mainstream.
Zealand.
Yeah, mainstream. Yeah.
Definitely mainstream.
So, yep, he's definitely speaking on behalf of mainstream. But what's the contradiction that he's saying in the next sentence? I guess he's just contradicted himself completely in one statement. So David Round is a representative of Pākehā New Zealand, I guess, let's say mainstream New Zealand. So they resent the feeling that this thing called biculturalism is increasingly being imposed upon them, and their own cultural heritage devalued and pushed aside. What's the ironic thing about that statement?
Well, he's kind of saying that Pākehā are pushing this Māori and like at the top of the chain, if you like.
Yeah. So they're really challenging biculturalism,
Yeah.
and they're saying it's this thing that's been imposed upon them, and that their cultural heritage. Yeah. The ironic thing about that is that's exactly what colonization was.
It is.
Yeah. So that's the very process of what colonization was about.
Yeah.
And so, without even realizing it, this guy's contradicted himself, I think.
Yeah, put himself into it.
Yeah, he has, And so the binary oppositions in this text are obviously that between Māori and Pākehā, Te Reo and English,
Mm.
you know. So what we sort of been doing is, this is a little bit of an introduction into deconstructing a text. You know, so you've identified the sort of binary oppositions that make certain assumptions inside the text. Who is being privileged then in this text is, it's saying Pākehā is
Mainstream, yeah.
it's being,
And Māori are marginalised.
yeah. Well, they actually think the opposite,
Yeah.
but they're actually just reinforcing their own position as the dominant, you know, cultural group. So, you know, I thought it was a nice way for us to introduce ourselves to this, just this process of deconstruction. So remember, deconstruction is about binaries, undermining the binary. So exposing the one that's being privileged, and the one that's being marginalized, and identifying the one that's being marginalized. And then exposing also the contradictions in the text. So those are probably the key things in terms of deconstruction. And I think that's it.
That's cool.
So I hope that sort of, you know, helps with your guys, because you've already submitted your forums this week, but it leads into, there's some videos there on structuralism and binary oppositions. So, you know, don't be too, I said to students, don't be too stressed about if you're not really that sure with structuralism and binary oppositions. You can do your own little bit of research too. Just do your own little Google researches and find out about structuralism and that sort of thing, plus the ones that I put up there. And then, you know, put up a post, you know, and you might just want to concentrate on binary oppositions in a cultural context, you know, so examples from your own life where you think this binary opposition sort of concept might be useful in explaining a situation. Or you might look at structuralism and language, you know, and how binaries in terms of language have been challenged in some way. I'm not sure, it's up to you. Have a little bit of a reading, have a little bit of a watch of those forums that are there, those links that are there, and then yeah, just put your post up and I'll contribute to them next week. Now,
so then for the structuralism and the binary opposition, is that the one due for the 6th of March?
Yeah, so it's next Sunday. Yep. That one's not due till then. And social construction one's due on Sunday. And then, so what I've said to the students, if you want to get top marks, you need to reply back to at least 3 posts. So they might just say, oh, I found that really interesting. It made me think about this in this way. Or I just want us to get used to, you know, not just posting and forgetting stuff, just reading people's and giving some feedback.
Yep.
Yep. So that's,
I read Neil's one.
yeah.
That was really good.
Oh, she had hers. She came in and brought her draft to me on the Monday.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
She's good, eh?
Yeah, she's awesome, and yeah, I was really impressed. So you guys are going to have a really good class this year.
Yeah, they're a cricket.
Yeah, they're a cricket.
They're funny. Was that Neil that was with Linda sharing the computer?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, she's neat. She's so fun.
Yeah.
She's a neat lady.
Yeah. No, it's I've been really impressed with Neil, and well, everyone really. The class we had on Sunday was a really cool class. They loved Noho, and I think we're going to have a really good year. We still got some others to come in. Actually, we've got some late enrollments coming in this week. So hopefully we'll have a class of around 20, 21, 22 students.
It's cool.
So the class that the Zoom thing that we done last night with Linda.
Yep.
Are those and this one, are these the 2 things that we missed out on that we had to get in this week? Is it find the ball we need?
So with Linda will have a forum for you to do as well, eh?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
So your 4 papers, so mile 103 and 104, I'm not sure if they're up yet. If they're not up, then don't stress, because if they haven't put
Yeah,
them up,
I don't think they are up, she
Yeah.
said. Yeah.
if you can't see them, then don't stress, because that means the kayaku hasn't got them ready yet. So you won't be penalised for that. They'll get them up, and then they'll have to leave them open for you to be able to do them. And then there's mile 104 and 103, and then my paper and Linda's paper that are the 4 for you this semester. So every week, each paper should have a forum. Ours are all up, so mine and Linda's are all up, and we just got to wait for your 103 and 104. And then every Wednesday will be on the timetable scheduled your tutorials, your Zoom tutorials on the timetable. And so the kayakers should be aware of their scheduled timetables. So they should be letting you know when those are. So next week, you should have mile 103, so that's Matua Monti. So I better chase them up to make sure that you guys have got a session for that next week.
Oh, yeah, I sent you a message on Voom today. Oh, I think it was Voom or one of these things.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering about cross-crediting some of our work.
Yep.
How do we go about doing that?
So what we could look at is if you've got level 5 quals in relevant courses, we can look at cross-crediting, which is easy. RPLing, what we could look at is, because of your guys' mahi, we could look at cross-credit or RPLing Linda's business writing paper.
Yep.
Because with your guys' mahi, I think you guys are going to be all okay with that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
Because I know some of our staff who are on the degree, so there's 2 staff members at the Wānanga. We RPL'd their business writing paper because they already work in that space.
Yeah.
So that would be one. The other one would be dependent on your levels of reo.
Because I done reo at Te Wānanga o Raukua.
Okay, what level was that?
Level 1. Oh, I can't remember what levels, but I did year 1, 2, and 3.
Oh, okay. So if you've got level 5,
like maki reo and stuff like that. So,
oh yeah. So you need to send those in.
Okay.
Scan them and send them in to me and Arua Taupari. Because if they're level 5s, we can just look at cross-crediting them.
Yeah, I think level 7 was my paper.
Yeah. So you could get potentially 1, 2, 3 papers, real papers, cross-credited.
Yeah.
So yeah. And what have you got?
I did a 3-year degree with them, so it was compulsory that we did,
Easy.
Te Reo Māori and iwi and hapu.
Yep. Easy. So what we need is descriptors of the learning outcomes.
Okay.
We align those with the learning outcomes. So just a transcript and then the learning outcomes for those courses. And then we just align them with our ones. And as long as we can tick off all the boxes, then the cross-credit process will be easy. And then the RPLing would be based on evidence of writing in your mahi in your work. So any reports, memos, anything, you just put a portfolio together and we can look at the business writing paper.
Okay.
Cool.
Yeah. So if you guys put all those together and send them in as soon as possible, because we want to get those done quickly, because they've got to go to a PAC hui, through a program committee hui, then a school committee hui, and so it takes a while. In the meantime, we'd probably still want you to just keep doing the course until we get it approved, and then you'd get the cross credit, and then you wouldn't be charged the fees for those papers.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's cool. Thank you.
Cool.
Because we do a Te Reti o Waitangi paper too, eh?
Oh, yeah, the treaty stuff's weaved right throughout this degree.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so what are you guys doing? Policy or business? Policy.
Policy.
Yeah,
I'm doing policy.
yeah, policy has policy's got a few papers on the treaty.
Oh, yeah.
Um,
I'm doing it too.
what did you do, Paige? Well,
Oh, so I've done Te Reti o Waitangi as well for Te Wananga o Raukawa.
yeah, so we would have to look
Yeah.
at...
Yeah, and I've done, I'll just get all my results together and I'll send them in.
Yep, and then
So
we
you
can
can
have a
see
look.
a picture.
Because the only bummer for my course is when I done my diploma last year, because it's Aotearoa, the Wānanga.
Yep.
They don't send your results through till later because we don't graduate till May this year, even though we finished last year. So I can't get my transcript for any of my stuff that I done.
Hey, you should be
Yeah,
able to
well,
make a copy of your transcript.
I've done like 20 emails. I ring them up every day, but nobody can give it to me because it's not in the system yet. But I've completed all the thing and done all my papers,
Did you
got
send
passed.
your results?
Did they send you your results over the summer?
No, it's just you got told when you handed in,
You passed.
yeah, you either
Right.
achieve or not
Oh, you-
achieve.
Oh, okay.
Why is it true that? That was only verbally. You don't get nothing on paper.
Wow.
So,
No.
What level was it? Level
5. Yeah.
Okay. And were they unit standards?
Oh, what the hell was? I don't know. I done the leadership and governance course with Matitu Hiriwini.
Oh,
And
okay. And that's a level 5. Yeah, no, we'll have a look at that because there is, yeah, I'm sure it could be connected somehow. But I'd have to have a closer look at them
Yeah, cool.
to figure that out.
But I can send the outcomes and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, cool. And then we can just get that into the process because May's bloody late. That's the end of the bloody semester, just about.
Yeah.
So that's not going to help you. We'll see what somebody might know. We've got a few staff from Aotearoa working for us now. You might be able,
Cool.
might be able to get.
Because my tutor just doesn't know where to get the information from. And when I ring head office, they say you've got to go to the branch. But when I ring the branch, they don't know how to get it.
Okay. Yeah, well, yeah, so send them in and we'll see what we can do.
Cool.
Hey, thanks for your time, guys. Did
no, thank you. Ngā mihi.
you any questions? Anything else about the course or program, or you happy, up to date with everything? If you email Monty Aranga, so write this down if you can, or maybe I'll introduce you guys through email. Just to ask them for anything that they can send you since the Iwananga pages are up. Yeah, for their courses. Those two courses are different. The other courses because they're tikanga and reo. They're you'll enjoy them, but for you, Paige, you might end up obviously cross-crediting those. But just good to just keep in touch with them.
I'll get all those paperwork together.
Yeah,
and send
send it to me and Rua Taupari.
Okay.
She's the administrator. Yeah,
she's cool. She's cool.
She's
She's on to it, eh?
Yeah. They're working really hard at the moment. The WA's not looking after them.
No, she's really helpful.
Yeah.
She's awesome.
Okay, awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yep, no worries. We'll catch up.
I'm going to go. Oh, sorry.
Yep.
I'm going to go away thinking about binary and stuff now. I'll be pulling everything up as soon as I walk out the door.
You'll be deconstructing everything.
Yeah.
So at the next Noho, you guys can only make the Saturday, Sunday?
Yeah.
Yeah, we were going to ask if we could come during the day and come home at night with the kids, if that was possible.
No,
it's in Tauranga, isn't it?
Yeah.
We'll just take it.
Yeah, we'll just.
No, we'll be right.
We'll be all right.
Yeah, at this stage it'll be Saturday, Sunday.
Yeah.
Okay.
But we'll keep it because my boss is a bit anal.
Tell Linda to stop being anal.
Yeah.
His boss is colonised. No, sorry.
We're changing the policy now at work because Healthy Families is we're doing a work well kind of program.
Yeah.
Even though we're a Māori organisation, we don't practice being Māori. In our
Oh, yes. Sounds
even
familiar.
though we're called Te Aohau, there's no Māori tikanga or practice in there at all.
There's a lot of social
So we're
construction
changing it all at the moment.
Oh,
So that's
you're going to learn about all that sort of stuff in this degree because, well, I just had a conversation today because it structures, it's where meaning is constituted through the structures in society. So Karl Marx's critique of capitalism, he says that individual cultural identity is irrelevant. He says what is important is understanding the structures that constitute meaning in a society. So he's saying economic structures are what govern reality in the world. And so how we might apply that and say Māori organisations is they're governed by certain structures that are set by, the Crown, the government. Those structures are so powerful that they actually determine or your way of behaving or acting without you even being aware of it. So
institutionalised, isn't it?
Yeah, you end up contradicting your own tikanga values. So it's common. It happens, and I can say same sort of critique about certain things that the wānanga does, but it's okay. It's okay to be critical, to be aware of it. It's just when you're not and you don't change it, that's when it becomes an issue. Yeah, it becomes an issue. So it's good, you're living that stuff. That's why this stuff is. I think our students pick up on it quite well because they live it. They can see it around them all the time. Awesome.
Yeah.
Well,
All right,
you guys have a good night, and
we'll get that assignment on Sunday.
Can't wait. No worries.
Awesome. Thank you.
See ya.